Afternoon, everybody, and thank you for making the time to come along this afternoon. This has been quite a significant week as part of the university's experience, where we bring together our researchers across the institution with a real focus on something that I just believe is so fundamentally important, which is the research environment, enabling people to contribute, showcasing things, developing new ideas, meeting new colleagues, working in identifying ways to work across an interdisciplinary way. All of those things are so important in life. And there's such a richness within the university that it's brilliant to see. But of course, normally you do that in a week and we're wandering around the place and we're seeing things and we're talking to people and we're relating to them in ways that we are used to. Today, and I must confess to having lost the plot as to whether it's 12 or 13 weeks since we've been in lockdown, we've had to learn and do things in different ways. I want to talk a bit about the impact of research and the pandemic, and those 12 to 13 weeks have seen a number of things happen. And one of the key things, and one of the things that gives me just great hope for the future, absolutely brilliant hope for the future, is the determination of individuals to continue to pursue frontiers of knowledge and discovery. It may be their own discovery, or it may be the discovery of something different and something new. But it's the determination to do that. The determination that got you along here today. The determination, the resilience that during our annual research conference and Researchers Week, we've had over 500 logins. And you have to remember, that's 500 logins at a time when a number of our colleagues are homeschooling, are caring, are transforming their learning from what has been a traditional means of communication to a blended learning environment. All of those are challenges and pressures on individuals. So the resilience to keep going with the research and to maintain the research has been quite phenomenal. I did a interesting session with professors, I think about 10 days ago, and then Silke, who's here, will put me right as to when it was, where we were talking about changing the nature and the way that we get involved in research workloads and how we make allocations of time for people to engage in research. And it's quite typical from our researchers that the first question was not about, well, what does this mean and how does this work? It wasn't about what are the implications for me. It wasn't about, the logistics of this for the ref, etc. It was, can you tell me when I can go back into my research laboratory? And that's about the dedication, the resilience that comes with research. We had to close many of our research laboratories for a number of reasons. Those reasons vary from health and safety to we donated all the equipment in the lab to the NHS for testing purposes, so there was nothing to go in for. So there's a whole series of reasons why that happened. And you think to yourself, wow, that's a real commitment to wanting to do something. But of course, people have got different types of research laboratories. And what the pandemic has done is opened up a different laboratory in the social sciences, in health inequalities, very different sort of scenarios. So resilience has been a major factor of what has happened, and determination. We clearly have had that same resilience when people have had issues about research projects. where those research projects, can we complete this research project? The funder wants us to do something. Can we do it by this deadline? We're not allowed out. We can't meet. We can't talk, etc. And people have found ways. People have found ways around that. People have found ways to be collaborative and collegial in what they do. And that's really significant. I think it was about, and I don't know if, I can't see exactly who's in this session, but I would say it was within the first 2 or 3 weeks of lockdown that the university conducted its first virtual PhD Viva, where we worked through what it was that needed to be done, and we made it happen. We made it happen. Why did we make it happen? Because you'd got supervisors, examiners, and students, research students, who all thought, actually, it really is important that we look at what we can do to ensure that this works, and this works for the student. Because, what we do is always in the interest, in terms of research students, always in the interest of the research student. We want people to succeed. That's what universities are about. We want people to succeed, and we want to push those frontiers of knowledge. So resilience has been brilliant, but there's some downsides, and it's a bit of a sad indictment of our society that when you look at research outputs during the period of a lockdown, there is a gender distortion in terms of those outputs, where men have, generally speaking, continued to produce at the same rate and women haven't. And that says quite a bit about our society. Yes, people will say, well, that's just a short period of time to look at, etc. But there is clearly something there. And we as a university need, if our outputs are distorted in that way, we need to have a look at that. We need to think about what that means, because it's not really acceptable as part of a society and as part of an institution that things get developed and don't get addressed. So the resilience has been a really, really key thing, and the ingenuity that goes with it. But then there's also the value of research and what people see as the importance of research. And it's very interesting watching the government respond to university needs. And what the government has said to the UK universities, who have said quite clearly, we are facing significant financial difficulties in the year 2020-21. Really big financial difficulties over what students will do, what they'll decide to do. And the government view has been, very supportive, incredibly supportive in words. And it says effectively that they're right behind us, without producing a single penny, not one penny. And it is the responsibility of universities, which are organisations that have a particular role, sort of quasi-public sector role, but not a penny. However, the big agenda discussion, and where you're likely to see, and I'm really hopeful of this, investment in universities as a result of the pandemic, will be in research and innovation. And it'll be in research and innovation because that aspect of our work is so important to the development of the economy. That's why the investment will be there, but it'll also be there for another reason, and that's the investment in our society. You've got a real shift taking place prior to the pandemic, the value of universities, of the university world, was very much looked at what is the economic impact? How much do graduates earn? What type of job have they got? When you look at that impact of how much does a graduate earn, clearly it's about wanting graduates to earn as much as possible. And the simple measure was, how much do they earn? What I think we've seen, although many are still stumbling around this, what I think we've seen is a complete redrawing of the value of roles in our society and in our economy. And you saw that for Thursday night after Thursday night after Thursday night of people going out on the streets in neighbourhoods where they may or may not know people that they're next to and applauding public health workers. And many of those health workers in this area are graduates of this university. To be frank, you will not go on a hospital ward anywhere in this area without coming across a nurse that has been trained at the University of Wolverhampton. Those of you with children at school in the area will not be sending them to schools where there aren't staff trained at the University of Wolverhampton. The paramedic who picks people up in the ambulance and treats them at the roadside, probably trained at the University of Wolverhampton. All of those are comparatively and relatively lower paid occupations, but seen, as really important today. And that's one of the things that's come out of there. And what we need to focus on is a real shift in the values of our society and our economy around the nature of some roles, the roles in social care, the roles in social work. All of those have taken a greater predominance. And what we need is a government that reflects on that and says, basically, key worker qualifications, anybody who goes to work in the NHS or within the state sector of the school system should have their tuition fee debts written off for the rest of their lives, because they are making such a major contribution. And that's why when I talked about the importance of research, it isn't just about the economy anymore. It's about our social infrastructure, and it's about the nature of where we are. And it's why government, I believe, will invest in research. It needs to invest in that research to boost the economy. The government's done great things in providing schemes that enable people to carry on working, carry on living, carry on being paid. Some fantastic things. But it needs to repay that into the economy. It needs to rebuild that economy. And to do that, you need research and innovation. You don't do what you did before, because things have changed and life has moved on. So you got and then you've got the opportunities that come from the pandemic. And that's opportunities about research. And we all want to be in a position where we don't have a pandemic again, where we don't have the loss that we've had in that pandemic. And some of the basic principles of lockdown, you simply have to go back to I think it was the 17th century. None of my panelists, I think, are historians, but you go to a little village called Eyam in Derbyshire, at the height of the bubonic plague. Martin will tell you what date it was in a minute, where the local rector took the decision in the height of the bubonic plague that nobody should leave the village, that all the food would be brought to the village, And you're talking about 400 years ago. And that village is a testimony to lockdown. And you have to think, what we can't do as a society is to lose the lessons and ignore the lessons from 400 years ago in the village of Eyam again. We must think about what that means as we go forward. You have scenarios that are very clear in Wolverhampton, Black Country. Wolverhampton has got the highest spike of COVID-19 cases in the West Midlands. The Black Country has a very high spike, but Wolverhampton has the highest spike. We need to understand why that is. We need to think about what that means. And that's about looking at what are the underlying reasons for that. There will be a number of reasons that we can today share, ranging from underlying health conditions to cultural issues, to the nature of housing and how families live in houses, to education. But it's really about inequalities, underlying inequality, and in many instances, poverty. We need to understand, and we need to be researching those areas with our medics, with our healthcare workers, with our social scientists. And that's why it's so important that we work in a multidisciplinary way. We need to understand what those issues were. We need to understand why, in terms of our education system, we haven't learned the lessons of Eyam all those years ago. Why it's still there. So there are opportunities there. There are opportunities to make it a safer and better place. And I'm delighted at some of my colleagues and the innovation that they've had. So we have, I'll probably get the country wrong, but quite a bit of work in Africa around education around the pandemic. Numerous bids into research councils about how we look at shifts in educational practice and shifts in learning practice. I'm also delighted to say that Wolverhampton, in one of our spin-out companies that comes from our research institute in health science, we're now in the position where we will shortly be entering a drug discovery into clinical trials for the treatment of the coronavirus, putting us right at the heart of drug discovery and utilization of drugs as a means of resolving some of those issues. And that's what's fantastic about how our researchers come together. We've got people looking at the social science implications. We've got colleagues who will be looking to see what the impact is on our students. What a wonderful research laboratory we have. What is the impact on our students? What is the impact on the students in the schools that are academies of this university, on their learning? What is the impact on the young people in the most deprived wards of one of the most deprived regions of the country around their education, which Martin has been dealing with in the terms of STEM? What are the implications of that? We need to, and there's ways in which we need to focus on how we discover, how we learn, and how we make sure that we continue to push those frontiers and those boundaries of knowledge. So the pandemic has been horrible. It's been very tragic. It's changed the way of life. But the researchers amongst us demonstrate the resilience our communities have and our way of life has. And that's why it's so important that we continue to push at those frontiers of discovery. because we don't want anywhere in this area to be the high spike of future pandemics. We don't want future pandemics, and we don't want our communities to be held back educationally, health-wise and socially, and we want a rich and vibrant economy. All of those driven by research and innovation, and a lot of it driven from the University of Wolverhampton. So thank you, colleagues. Deborah, I was going to leave it there, if that's okay.
That's lovely. Thank you, Jeff. Mina's made a comment about agreeing with the value of education to society, and mentions that Black Lives Matters is a clear indication of where deficits have been. So thank you for sharing that with us, Mina. One of our postgraduate researchers, who's a historian, has offered you the date for Iam's quarantine, which was the 24th of June, 1666.
Can we thank that researcher, because they got Martin out of jail there.
Jeff has to leave us at quarter two. So are there any questions that anybody wants to ask Jeff before we hand over to our panel for their comments? It's all very quiet. Okay, thank you very much. So I will hand over to our panel. So I don't know which one of you wants to speak first. Martin, there you go, Martin. You've got the
okay. All right. Well, thanks for that. And yeah, I mean, if we're talking about our community, and we're talking about research, and we're talking about how not necessarily how the university responded, but how everybody's responded to this, and how sort of us as researchers and as practitioners and have responded to the pandemic. It's been quite a strange time, and I think if you look at quite introspective, a number of different things has happened. We've been able to reflect on how we are, right, as people, and I think that's been really, really interesting. If you're a laboratory-based researcher and you can't research without a laboratory, how can you research? So it's been very interesting for us to be introspective, I think, and whether that's as parents, as people that have suddenly turned from higher education educators into home educators, from researchers without a laboratory, and to be disenfranchised from that, I think is particularly if that is your world, I think it's been a thing that everybody's had to kind of deal with, and we've had questions on some of these discussions about how can we teach? If we're talking to people, I can see some faces on the screen here, and that's lovely. It's lovely to see. It's lovely to see friendly faces. It really is. But what I'm doing is I'm looking at a lens that's there, right? So how am I getting the validation from the people that I'm talking to? The emotional side of the pandemic for the individual has been very interesting, I think, and I think we've had to cope a lot with that. And with regards to the whole sort of research thing, I think actually it's brought the whole idea of basically sort of book-based research back to the fore. The idea that we can still do research even without talking to people, and it's fantastic. And the idea that actually we are we're looking at the now we've got to use things like Teams and Zoom, and what are the ethics of that? Who owns the videos that we're recording now? The whole sort of can of worms that it's opened, actually, if you think about it as a research from a pedagogical point of view, has been absolutely fantastic, I think, because we're starting to consider different ways of doing it. If we're moving into the new normal, then that has been really it's been really there is a silver lining somewhere. Everybody's had a terrible time, and actually there are bad. There's so much bad, but actually there has been some good. I was talking to a practitioner the other day, who works in critical care pharmacy in a hospital, and they were saying that the ways of the practitioners, that the doctors, the nurses, and everything, the way they communicate within practice has completely changed. You know, it's more efficient, it's better for the patient, and the way their trust works has completely changed, right? So actually, we've, you know, by far going out from the sort of the world of research and the world of the university, right? That we are changing for the better from all of this, and I strongly believe that. And but coming from and I'm on my soapbox now, so I apologise, right, to everyone who's watching. Coming from so the point of view of a science communicator and a public engagement sort of practitioner, if you like, you know, my job is talking. My job is face-to-face delivery, and engaging people and reading an audience and controlling an audience. Controlling is a bad word, I know. But like, you know, being able to sort of go out there and meet people and talk to people and promote our university and talk about the good work that we do is basically my bread and butter job, and it's what my group do. And it's been very difficult to do that online, and to be able to turn on a 5p piece and change the way we practice from basically going into a school, a community place, into a space, taking over an entire shopping centre shop, you know, and popping up somewhere is has been very difficult from the sort of engagement research type, you know, sort of area, if you like. And it has been very interesting to see how practitioners have been changing to this sort of online method of delivery. Because what you've got to imagine is, right, people who aren't part of a university machine like I am, right, who are very, very, very fortunate to be part of a fantastic place, who are you know, practitioners in their own right, that they make their money from doing science communication or public engagements. They lost all of their income in overnight, 100%, right? And so for them to be able to change like we have has been very, very, very difficult, and it's taken them a long time. You know, and we've been very fortunate that we've got very forward-facing, very sort of active departments that actually, you know, we don't always sort of have to sort of wait for this giant sort of tanker to turn around. You know, we can say we know what we're doing, we know what the brand is, we know how to engage the public, we're going to go out and do it. And indeed, that's what my team did. You know, we had a program of activity in 5 days, and we were already doing it, you know, and I think you know, to be able to be reactive like that was really fantastic. But it's come from a lot of sort of like preparation, a lot of seeing what's coming at us, a lot of sort of like forward scanning, if you like, a lot of horizon scanning, thinking, well, actually we need to just, you know, be very reactive. We need to be very plastic. We need to be able to just react at a moment's notice, and that's what we've done. And not everybody's been able to do that, you know. I mean, our university was on the money straight away, you know, compared to some of our competitors. They were weeks and weeks and weeks behind us, you know. And I'm personally very proud of that, you know, the way our institution has reacted to the sort of community needs, the learning needs of the people that are out there, right? And the way that instead of looking at the university as a whole, we've started looking at our community more, and how research is going to move into the community, and how we are supporting the place around the university. I'm not talking about like 160 odd miles away, you know. I'm talking about like 10 miles away. I'm talking about in one postcode, you know, the people in WV3, the people in WV10, you know, how we're supporting those people, I think has been fantastic. And if, you know, and I know a lot of groups are starting to think about how we can empower our community, you know, and if we can do that through research, like the community-based research that I know some of the groups are doing at the university, I think is a fantastic thing, actually. And the more we can empower our community to be part of the work the university does, to give them the skills, you know, like the like the Learning City UNESCO project that the university is involved, I think is an absolutely fantastic thing. So I'm going to get off my soapbox now and let somebody else have a go.
Sarah, do you want to go next, or shall I?
Yeah, no, I'm happy to. Thanks, Silke.
Go.
To sort of pick up some of the things Martin and Jeff were bringing to the front here. I'm acutely aware that Teams is dinging away, and I hope it doesn't distract people. It's from the former meeting that I was in, and it links very nicely to the fact that I think what the pandemic has done has very, very strongly brought to the forefront for all of us an awareness of each other's contexts, an awareness of the intensely personal post-digital context that people are in. And by post-digital, Deborah did ask me to mention a little bit about this. We're describing people's lives that are really now where digital is increasingly embedded into the normal functioning of life, so that there are really few distinctions between what is digital, what is human. That's fading, but it's bringing with it a lot of concerns for us as well as opportunities. So what was pre-digital, such as the history point, is still very relevant. What was biological then is still very relevant, but also what is biological, technological and human is incredibly relevant now. And we have people in the society Martin's been talking around the university who don't use digital devices, are disadvantaged as a result. But digital will still use them, and data will still use them, and health services will keep records on them, and families will be either advantaged or disadvantaged through these situations. Some of the research where I work in the Education Observatory is perhaps useful to mention. One particular project that's just coming towards publication now is 80 testimonies from around the world, from different students, academics, all over the globe. And these were collected by Professor Peter Jandrić, who's a visiting professor with us from Croatia. He collected these at the point that the lockdown hit in different people's countries, including China, and in the local context in and around us. So my colleague, Professor Michael Jopling, wrote one. My husband, who's a retired maths teacher, wrote one. And what people described was the very real human context around their teaching, their research, their sense of loss, if they had lost relatives, if they were sharing workspaces. They were talking about having to adapt suddenly to supervise, to research, to teach, to homeschool. And each and every one of these put a picture of their home workspace in this collection. So it's become the most enormous collective article. I've edited it with Peter Jandrić, and it will be out very soon. And so if people look up the journal Post-Digital Science and Education, we very soon will be able to read some of these. And it's our hope to do some further research. A few of us in the observatory will go back to these participants and work with them. So the importance of context, and looking at context in a different way to the way in which we have previously. In higher education policy, we've more or less missed out individual contexts. We write it policy, we talk about the student experience, we don't talk about yours or my student experience, individual experiences. And if we start to think about how we might be working online, and then we talk about blended learning, maybe we also need to talk about blended post-digital learning, or people's contexts understood in this manner. So just moving to a sort of more international example of a project, at the moment we have Professor John Traxler, who is researching for the Department for International Development, and along with Howard Scott and Matt Smith in the Faculty of Education, Health and Wellbeing, and myself, we've actually been gathering again evidence from around different experts, and also from the literature for application in crisis contexts. And the realization is that ours is a crisis context, just as other parts of the world are. And we have students without laptops, and we have people who can't participate in education. So there's an increasing awareness of how the global context can inform the local and vice versa. And I think we really need to take advantage of some of our digital opportunities to bring those conversations together, and to understand from the global south where things have worked, and to apply that back into our context. We had an example recently of a local regional policy debate that we normally hold in the university, and we invite other universities to take part with us. And we were able to have an international speaker and to just have lots and lots of people, just like this research week has been very highly populated with participants. And it suddenly brought such a dynamic conversation. And we had Black Lives Matters debate going on, and it's informed what we'll do the next debate on. So again, these are just a few of the examples. Just one more, the Black Country Insight report that we produce in the Education Observatory. This time we've commented on this post-digital context, and we've commented on our recent research funding from the EPSRC, our hopes for the ESRC funding bids, and the chance to work with people in the local community on demand-led post-digital research around digital skills and where we can actually really apply these in people's context. So there's rather a lot to take in there. Just finally to say that we hope soon to hold an e-research seminar in the observatory and throw open the invitation to people to attend that. And this will literally be people's experiences of how they have worked and continued to research, shown that resilience by doing research electronically. So it's probably time for me to shut up and let Silke have a go, I think. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Sarah. I think that was a nice lead into the three areas that I want to cover. The first one for me, the big one, was about the impact on researchers and research support staff. So the impact that the pandemic had on staff and what we need to learn from that. The second one is around how we do research. And the third one is around research funding, which Jeff already alluded to a little bit. But in terms of the impact on researchers, obviously one of the most obvious ones was that people have become ill with COVID-19. We know from the national data that the health impact has been particularly evident for BAME staff, and I know of a number of our staff who have been ill with COVID-19, and so that was certainly a really frightening, scary time. Other colleagues had to look after their loved ones, relatives, family that have been suffering from the disease. I think the human cost of that we must not underestimate. The second area has then been around the mental health effects of the pandemic. I don't know if you saw, but Vita did a survey into the effects of COVID-19 on researchers, and they had some 4,800 researchers participate, and 80% of respondents noted that they experienced some sort of mental distress because of the pandemic. Now, what is really interesting to me was the groups where this was mostly felt, I could have almost predicted. So the groups that have reported the highest levels of mental distress were doctoral researchers. So this is perhaps, answering the question that Metka was asking about younger versus older researchers. I'm not saying all doctoral researchers are young, but by and large, the age profile is that doctoral researchers are younger. Women, and then finally staff from arts and humanities, which I also found interesting, because I think one of the characteristics of arts and humanities research is typically still people are doing their own individual research. They're writing their individual monographs, whereas in the labs you tend to have more of a group-based approach to research. So I think there are some important lessons that we need to learn from this about how we conduct research and how we support each other during these times. UKRI has obviously made some guarantees for doctoral researchers in terms of their financial support. Unfortunately, we only had one UKRI funded doctoral student in the university. Most of our students are either self-funded, and we have a number that are funded by bursaries from us. So we put in place arrangements where our doctoral researchers can get up to 6 months extension to their studies without us charging any fees for these 6 months. And for students that are on bursaries by us, up to 2 months extension of their bursaries. And that is regardless of the level at which they're at, if the research has affected your progress in your doctoral study. So we hope this is going some way towards alleviating some of the anxieties I know that our doctoral researchers are feeling. So that is mental health. And then finally, even if you're healthy, there are effects on your productivity. Jeff and Sarah mentioned, caring responsibilities that people are having at home and that are struggling with that. So we know that submission rates to journals by women have fallen at a time when overall submission rates to journals have actually gone up. So this is a really interesting trend, and my fear is that that can perpetuate existing inequalities. However, what is also interesting, our colleague Mike Thelwell, I don't think he's in that meeting. He's done research which suggests that women are more prevalent on papers that are actually addressing the pandemic. So I think that's, again, a really interesting dynamic. So productivity of women is falling in the presence of overall submission rates increasing. But what we seem to focus our efforts on is resolving the pandemic. I think we really need to start having conversations about that going forward. So impact on individual researchers, we really need to look into that and make sure that we are supporting people through this pandemic. The second area is how we do research. There was already mentioning about labs being closed, studios being closed, but there's also things around, social science researchers. When we did our interviews, really interesting to try and do interviews online or focus groups online, and how that is actually working. As soon as we went into lockdown, the Associate Dean there, Andy Lane, put out a call to all researchers to think about doing reflective journals about their experience, which I think was such a nice idea, because I think that could provide us with lots of interesting data going forward. And the health researchers in FEW have published a special issue of a journal on the reflections of their professional doctorate students through this pandemic. So I think that's a really, really nice initiative. Our scholarly comms are changing massively, aren't they? I mean, I talked about journal submission rates, but we used to be going to conferences to meet people. Now, it's a really interesting dynamic, because on the one hand, we have these facilities to do these things now online, which means probably people that maybe didn't have the resources, time, money to travel to conferences can now participate. And I saw PGR students earlier on about this. The other side has been that, if I may say, that the sort of big names in your field, they're all of a sudden more accessible. We had this week my colleague Alessandro Zattoni from Luis University, was really difficult to get hold of at normal times, but he gave an 1.5-hour seminar because we could have him online during these times. So there are new possibilities, but the dynamics are so different. They're so different, and it changes how we interact. I think the final thing around how we do research is in terms of open research. I think there has been a huge, very, very welcome push towards open science, and all of the publishers are making research related to C19 openly accessible. Wouldn't it be fantastic if that was the case for all research? I think that is a real opportunity and something we need to learn going forward. We need to openly communicate our research. There shouldn't be paywalls behind which our research is being hidden. So that leads me nicely to my final point about funding. And Jeff mentioned this. Most of the funders were very sympathetic about extensions to projects, as long as there were no cost extensions. So this is a real challenge for us to cope with, because there is no extra money in the system. In fact, costs are going up as we are moving online. Have to make provisions that I talked about earlier on, such as giving a degree of security to our doctoral students. So this is a real issue for us. One of the discussions that UK had with UKRI is in relation to Research Council funded projects, because at the moment you will know they're 80% full economic cost funded. But in reality, this is much worse, because one of the things when you're putting in bids to research councils is that you're encouraged to provide match funding. And this has led to a race, because the idea is that the more match funding your institution provides, the more committed you are to this and the more likely you'll win. So in fact, many projects are not at 80% FEC funded, they're probably at 40 or 50% FEC funded, because institutions are putting resources into that. This is not sustainable. And especially not sustainable for institutions like ours, where we have excellent research, but we haven't got the large research funding pots to, for example, through QR, to be able to support this. So it disadvantages institutions like ours. And I think there's a real need to level the playing field. There has been this new fund by UKRI for C19, and I'm really pleased to see that many of our colleagues are putting their energies and their expertise and their knowledge towards trying to provide solutions. But again, if you look at the projects that are being awarded, there is a bit of a skew. Have a look at those that have come out. So lots of challenges, some really exciting opportunities, but I think for me a really important thing moving forward is that we need to look after each other, need to look after our research and find different ways of doing things. Thank you, Deborah. Over to you.
Thank you. We've had a lovely little commentary running down the side of the discussions. So some of those comments have been around the monumental change, or is it so monumental? I know that Silke has seen that comment, but this change to an online environment really gives us an insight into the generations following us. We've had positive comments about accessibility of research activities online. And also a comment from Professor John Traxler. He said he thinks the discrepancies between how fast the outside world changes, its opportunities and its challenges, and response to times of our normal processes and procedure is an ongoing concern. There was a lovely comment earlier from Mina, who was saying about laboratories and saying that some of us have been in the lab. I can't say this now. The laboratory of life, all our careers, and have never stopped researching during the pandemic. It's good to see that colleagues are now becoming philosophical as well. So we've got lots of comments, and the comments continue to come in. Metka's saying that research should not be a matter of privilege or luxury, like for comparisons, unpaid internships or work experience. How do we convey that message?
That's a very good question. Shall I pick up on that? I mean, is that like so I don't know whether I can answer that question. And I think in the world of work and the world of internships now, we have many, particularly in the world of science communication. There are a lot of internships around. My group is made out of interns that are graduates of our university, and by their very nature, an internship should be paid. You know, there's there shouldn't be unpaid internships. I think personally shouldn't be allowed. And indeed, when we are asking for I think volunteers, I'll put that in inverted commas, for the biggest science shows around the world, like the Big Bang and their New Scientist Live at the Excel Arena in London, which will hopefully be there in October, because we'll be there once they've got rid of the hospital that's in the middle of the Excel Arena at the moment. You know, there's always a massive controversy around this idea of paid or unpaid sort of volunteer internships and so on. And actually, I think you know, if we're going to try and convey that message, I think you know, if you're going to give somebody an opportunity to do something, you know, you give them a placement, then you know, they're having the opportunity is part of isn't just the opportunity to meet the people, it's the opportunity to have part of that life, and that includes the money. So yeah, I think I don't know whether that answers the question, but I think everybody should have the opportunity to be paid properly for an internship. You know, I don't think there should be any unpaid opportunities like that anymore.
I mean, if I may come in, Medka, I think it's a broader discussion in terms of funding of research. And in the UK, we obviously have the dual funding system. But if you actually look at who the beneficiaries are, both in terms of the Research Council funding, the competitive strand, and the block grant, which is the QR, obviously the Russell Group universities are in a different league. What gives me hope is one thing, which is UKRI really takes equality, diversity and inclusion seriously. So they've started last year doing an equality impact assessment on their research funding. It's very obvious when you look at the data from the research councils that women are underrepresented, ethnic minorities are underrepresented. I saw somebody tweet the other day that there were 5 years where AHRC didn't award a single fellowship to a BAME fellow. Shocking. So I know UKRI are taking this seriously. I think that gives me hope. And in terms of, it's not only around protected characteristics, it's also about diversity of voices. So they are going out of their way to try and hear a greater diversity of voices in the debate around research funding priorities and so on and so forth. So we are facing huge inequalities in the funding system. I think there's a little ray of hope.
Sorry, turn my microphone back on. Thank you for that. Mina's mentioned that arts and humanities research is often not seen as urgent, and there's a fear that there's going to be a diversion of funds specifically to STEM subjects. She notes that multidisciplinary research has been promoted as the way forward in research. It usually would include social sciences first, humanities and arts subsequently. So arts and humanities researchers would be grateful of some form of reassurance, particularly as it's the arts and humanities that have kept people sane during lockdown.
I can jump in there. I can jump in there very quickly, if I may. With regard to that cross-disciplinary nature from the arts and humanities, and particularly the STEM subjects, we do have the STARTS Prize Iris project running right now at the University of Wolverhampton, which is exactly that. It's a collaboration between the arts, humanities and science that are looking at how collaborative activity happens between just those people. And actually now, if you look at the UKRI funding calls that are on there now for their citizen science projects, it is just for that. It is for collaborative activity between all of those areas to get that cross-disciplinary nature going, not just for people who are newly researching in the areas of citizen science and things like that, but also for those that are experienced. So I think there's a really big push for that, for just not STEM to take over like that. Actually, I think the cross-disciplinary nature of actually the sort of work that can happen after the pandemic, I think is really coming to the top. It's bubbling right to the top of everybody's sort of mind now, and I think it's going to be fantastic moving forwards.
I mean, if I may come in on that, I couldn't agree more. But I think we have to distinguish between what the situation is like at the university and what is the situation in the wider world outside. University of Wolverhampton, arts and humanities and social science research really punching above its weight. I mean, if you look at REF, we have 4 units of assessment in main panels A and B. and the remaining 13 units of assessment in main panel C and D, that is social sciences, arts and humanities. The main research income is actually coming to humanities, even though that is more competitive. So our humanities UA 26 is kicking the butt of the scientists. Sorry, scientists, you need to get your skates on. We have some brilliant arts and humanities research at Wolverhampton. Outside, it's very different. I mean, if you're interested, just look at the budget that AHRC has compared to EPSRC. Your jaw will drop. To come in, then it's even more important that we maintain membership of Horizon 2020 and totally. Horizon Europe, because there it's a little bit more balanced.
Thank you. And Sarah's just popped a point into the chat as well about an important point made by Jeff about how social science research is crucial to supporting the economy. So thank you for sharing that.
To add to that, Deborah, I think all of this is about the wider political economy, the very rapid changes, and showing just how relevant that social science research is. I think we do have a huge opportunity to link with scientists, to link with people working in computing, and I think that's terribly important as we go forward, that we find those places where we can get the cross-disciplinary and cross-sector research connections.
That's lovely. Thank you very much. So I'm just noting the time that we're coming to 3 o'clock and our session finishes at 3. So I would just like to hand. Oh, sorry.
Sorry, Deborah. Okay.
I'd just like to hand over to Silke, who's going to close the session.
Yeah, I was just going to say I'd need a couple of words at the end to. So this marks the end of our first fully online researchers week, and it's been a really, really interesting experience. In the last 3 days, you've had presentations on how to engage with the media, how to publish your work, how to achieve impact. We celebrated books that staff have published, so a series of really interesting sessions. The attendance has been absolutely phenomenal. We'll be doing a little publicity piece to give you the exact numbers, but hundreds and hundreds of people have logged in to the sessions over the various days, and that included researchers from the University of Wolverhampton, but we also welcomed researchers from other universities. And in line with what I said earlier on about open science, I would love to be able to continue this in the future. So you're very welcome to attend events going forward. And I hope you're also going to return the same to our researchers. I would like to thank a number of people who've made the last few days happen. Our fabulous presenters, panelists, the audience, as we can see again today, is some really fabulous participation, engagement and comments from everybody. Most of all, I would like to thank Deborah Curitan, who was really instrumental in actually getting our doctoral college online as soon as lockdown was happening, and who's also done the bulk of the heavy lifting to organize the last 3 days. Deborah, fabulous job. Thank you ever so much for all your efforts. Ben Halligan, who's always been behind us and has supported the activities this week, and Steve Greenfield, who's done a lot of the administration and booking behind the scenes. So thank you, everybody. It's been a really interesting week. I wish I could go for a drink with you to the pub now, but we can't. But at some point, I'll see you. And the first round is on me. All right. Take care.
I'll remember that. I'll remember that, Silke.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. John's asking a further circulation of the recording, the archive. We will be uploading the recordings to our doctoral college YouTube. It will be dependent on my bandwidth, so it will take me a little while, so I do apologise, but I have popped a link down there to the doctoral college YouTube account. So thank you everybody for today's session. It's been really, really interesting, and I know that I've learned a lot from all of the sessions that I've been in, that I've been moderating. So thank you everybody for your time and for your effort, and thank you everybody for attending.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
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 Bye.